What's going on, Lions fans? Welcome into Before the Roar, your preview podcast over here at prideofdetroit.com, a podcast where we basically take a look at the upcoming Lions opponent for that week, break down all the things that the Lions need to do in order to get a much needed win. Morgan, the Lions are coming off of their bye week where the Lions are now 5-2, and they'll be taking on the third of their divisional opponents in the Minnesota Vikings, first meeting of the season. First and foremost, just like, what is your initial thoughts of the Vikings, through the first 7-8 weeks now?
Up and down, right? They've obviously gone through some turmoil at the quarterback position that we'll get into. They've had some struggles on defense. It kind of looks like maybe a few of their core pieces are maybe reaching the end of their prime kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it hasn't been the Vikings we've grown accustomed to over the last couple of years, because it's a really good team. But I think there's just some issues there, and now they're back to McCarthy, and yeah, we're going to get into it, but there's a reason that they're sitting at 3-4, right, Meko?
Yeah, I mean, coming off a really bad and embarrassing loss on Thursday Night Football to the Los Angeles Chargers. Very, very one-sided game. Carson Wentz obviously sustained a number of injuries, it looks like, or at least, made some injuries worse in that game, and was subsequently put on IR following that game, which is why we're getting JJ McCarthy this week. But it is a team, like you said, it doesn't look like a team that we're used to seeing like in this position. Like, for them to be at 3-4, it's not what you expect from a Kevin O'Connell team, but there's still aspects of this team that are still very true to their identity. Their defense is still, one of the more feisty groups. Obviously, we're going to talk about Justin Jefferson and talk about the threat that he poses, as well as, they have Jordan Addison back. They have TJ Hawkinson. They just got Aaron Jones back, I believe, from a hamstring injury, I want to say.
Yeah, I think so.
Players have been having hamstring injuries this year. Like, I feel like
a lot of soft tissue.
a lot of soft tissue stuff. I feel like if it's a player that has like any amount of athleticism or speed out there, it's like, probably been a hamstring. But like you said, like week 8 was not a really good showing for the Vikings, and I think for them specifically, like getting back on the right side of things, trying to get to 500 on the season, is going to be really important for them coming into this game against the Lions.
Yeah, like they had their wins over the Bengals, the Bears, and the Browns, so they did get those wins. That's how they're sitting at 3-4. But to your point, last week, Meko, against the Chargers in week 8, they got thumped. Like, the Chargers got out there in like a lot of like 21 and 22 personnel, and their 2 tight ends are those like Harbaugh tight ends where they're like 300 pounders. Like, we're about to just pound the rock. And that's what happened against the Chargers for Minnesota. So it was a tough outing, and it's kind of set some stuff in motion, like you talked about, getting McCarthy back. But overall, they're pretty banged up, and they're in a similar situation to the Lions, right? I know we're about to get into the injury report, but yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, they're very much in a similar situation where it's a couple of key guys either that have been limited to practice or probably being held out of practice. So far, this is the first practice of the week. So the injury report that we're kind of going to go over is likely to change as the kind of the next couple of days of practice kind of trickle out. But I mean, some of the big names that I think Lions fans would be specifically, would like to hear specifically about. We have Jonathan Grenard, outside linebacker, was limited in practice today. Brian O'Neill, and one of their tackles, also limited in practice. However, Christian Darrisaw, who I believe started last game but then ended up leaving the game with an injury, was a full participant in practice. And then we talked about JJ McCarthy, full participant in practice. And then also Andrew Van Ginkel, who has been dealing with a neck injury, Morgan, also a full participant in practice today. So, those last 3 guys all trending obviously to play this week, but it'll be interesting to see throughout the game, like, are they truly 100%, or are there still like some nagging issues that they might be dealing with, throughout the game?
Yeah, and it'd be big for Minnesota to get Brian O'Neill and Darrisaw back, in my opinion, because you're already throwing McCarthy. We'll put it simply, guys. Like, we'll get into the offense in a minute. He looked rough in the 2 games he played before he went down and Wentz started playing. So to put him in a situation like Ford Field, where the fans have also had a week to rest, and without your starting tackles against Aiden Hutchinson and company, that's kind of a recipe for a tough afternoon, in my opinion. So I think it'd be really big for them to get them, like, they're definitely getting healthier overall, but if they can get those tackles back, that'd be huge, right, Meko?
Yeah, I'm also going to be very curious to see like what type of reception JJ McCarthy gets. Obviously, former Michigan quarterback, led Michigan to getting a national championship. So I'm sure you're going to see, he wore number 9, right? In Michigan, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure you're going to see a couple of like Michigan jerseys in the stands for JJ kind of coming back to the state of Michigan for his first game. But like you said, like it's still a divisional opponent, so that's still going to be a very difficult environment to come into, especially when you haven't played just due to injury over the last couple of weeks. So, like you mentioned, Minnesota's getting healthier in some key areas. Detroit, yes, right? Like I guess it's kind of hard to say. Like when you look at their injury report, a lot of guys either do not practice. Kirby Joseph, Craig Reynolds are the main two guys who did not practice today. Everybody else is pretty much in a limited capacity, which makes sense for the Lions just because it's the start of the week. I think Dan Campbell typically likes his guys to kind of ramp up throughout the week. Couple noticeable names though: Taylor Decker, again, limited, with the shoulder injury that he's been dealing with. Avonte Maddox, though, back on the practice field in a limited capacity. Malcolm Rodriguez back on the practice field in a limited capacity as well as Sione Vaki and Daniel Thomas, two guys that obviously have a lot of experience and play a lot on special teams. That's going to be big, and probably the biggest, and to me, Morgan, the most shocking. Terrion Arnold, full participant in practice, only a couple weeks removed from that shoulder injury that for a lot of fans that thought that he was either going to be out for the season or at least like for a large chunk of the season.
Yeah, that's huge in my opinion. I know people are mixed feelings at least on Terrion right now, but again, I just if you're listening to this, just give him some time, man. Sometimes progress isn't linear for any position, but especially cornerback. If you guys remember, all right, like think
Mm-hmm.
about the Darius Slays of the world. So just give him some time. He has all the tools. It could happen. But I like that Vaki's a limited practice because if Craig's out with that hamstring, was Craig, like Meko said, Craig didn't practice today. It'd be nice to have Vaki, like Meko said, both on special teams, but also as that running back three behind Jameer and David. So overall, getting healthier. And yeah, to your point about, I do wonder, but I think McCarthy will get booed just because like we booed the, you know what, out of Stafford, man. I don't, ooh.
I was gonna say like it wouldn't surprise me. Like again, just to kind of like it's a divisional opponent. Lions fans are going to want the Lions to continue to kind of
Yeah.
rack up those division wins, seeing as they already dropped one to Green Bay early in the season. So I will say about Terrion though, like to your point about being patient with him. In addition to that, like I know people are going to be really high on how this secondary played against the Bucks and things like that. I will say I don't know if you want to test fate twice by rolling out another set of that like of the Legion of Whom against Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Jalen Naylor is also like a really good wide receiver 3 for them. Like there's a number of things. We'll get to this more when we start talking about their offense, but like I think if you can get one of your starters back, regardless of how people may feel about Terrion's play so far this season, like that's still an upgrade to a unit where you were already kind of digging into your reserves to get some quality play.
Right, because if you get Terry on back, you're throwing him into a group. He'll probably start opposite of Amik. And guess who's not on this injury report? A fella named Brian Branch. So
Yeah.
obviously, the 2-week break did him well because he's not even listed anymore with that ankle or whatever he was dealing with prior to the suspension. So yeah, like you said, Meko, that it'd be nice to get some juice back in the secondary. Great to have those guys play so well 2 weeks ago against the Bucks, but I'd like to have some reinforcements because we know Minnesota's skill players are, to put it simply, like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So before we start talking about Minnesota's offense, let's talk about the Lions offense, because if you guys didn't listen to the last episode of Before the War, we did a midseason preview, and I think we did talk quite a bit about like the offense needing to, really kind of step it up coming out of the bye week. And that's something we even talked about on the main POD cast as well, specifically with, finding more success in the running game is finding more success on third down. But Morgan, when you look at this matchup against like with this Lions team against this version of this Minnesota Vikings team, like what are some things that they can do to take advantage of this defense? And are there any issues that you see with Minnesota that you feel like the Lions can kind of take advantage of?
Man, so it's still a Brian Flores defense. And like you said earlier, Meko, they play a certain brand of football and it's aggressive. So they're gonna try to pressure you. It's just what Brian Flores is gonna do. He's gonna mix up looks pre-snap. So Goff, but here's the good thing. Excuse me, Goff has seen it before. You know what I mean? Like he's
Yeah.
seen this before. He's gone against Brian Flores a bunch of times now. So that's always going to be a good thing, in my opinion, even if there are, at times, like anyone, he's going to have some errant throws or errant decisions. Well, that just happens. They're 15th right now in run defensive DVOA, 25th in pass defense DVOA. So they do, when you turn them on film, they tackle okay, but they do give up yards after the catch because they are
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes shorthanded in the secondary. Because if you like Goff likes to do, if Goff can beat you, if he can beat the blitz from a pre-snap standpoint, and what I mean by that is he knows where the blitz is coming. You didn't fool him, and he knows where the hole in the zone is or where he needs to go with the ball. He's going to get it there fast. And like we all know, that's a problem when you're playing the Lions because Amon Ra is terrific with the ball in his hands after the catch. Sam Laporta is really good for a tight end. Jameson's probably going to hit the blur on you and just it'll be 6, and that's a really big problem. So that's kind of how I was looking at their defense when I was watching their tape. But what do you see in Meko?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, like you said, this is a Brian Flores defense. It's very aggressive. 42% of the time they're blitzing, right? Which leads the NFL. The next team that blitzes just as much as the Atlanta Falcons at 40%. So that is how they're going to try and disrupt this Lions offense, is that they're going to try and send blitzes, not just on passing downs, but literally to disrupt the run as well, which is I think how they're able to have, so many tackles for loss, and still be kind of like middle of the road when it comes down to the run game. Like it's blitzing the rush blitzing a running team is kind of like a little bit of a roll of the dice, right? Because you could get gashed in that type of way. But Minnesota is finding good ways of doing that, mainly because they have good linebackers. When you talk about Van Ginkel, you talk about Ivan Pace, Metellus, Josh Metellus as well is another one of those players, like kind of one of their hybrid safety linebackers that's really good at being able to close in space and get guys to the ground. So that is an area where I think the Lions have to be careful, but at the same time, I do think it's something that they still do need to lean heavily in, because if you're able to get a lot of these, chunk plays on the ground and maintain a second and short or third and short type of situations, even if you do get your third down, you don't have to worry about Jared Goff dropping back and having so much pressure in his face, because that's like you're literally playing into Brian Flores' hand. With that said, like you were mentioning, they're not very good at the pass. 25th in DVOA. They're giving up about like 11 yards per catch. Like that's a lot. And when I start to hear numbers like that, like I do, I look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, I look at Jameson Williams, because like these could be the type of opportunities that if you're able to, send crossing routes through the blitz, or just find ways of having Jared Goff be able to have a clean pocket so that he can layer some throws into like some of these open spaces, you're probably going to be able to pick up a good amount of chunk yardage down the field.
Yep, I agree with you. And I love that you made that point about staying in like a third and manageable, right? Like not getting in those third and long situations where Brian Flores can get creative, right? They got 18 sacks on the season. Redmond leads them with 3 sacks. Like Grenard's still a good rusher. I think something to watch is like how will Decker hold up against Grenard if he lines up over that
Mm-hmm.
way, which I think he will, just because you don't want to line him up against Panay. So yeah, I love that your point about the tackles for loss too, because they do blitz a lot. So it'll be interesting to see how Johnny Morton decides to attack them when he does, and Hank Fraley too, being the running game coordinator. Like, what are they going to do to combat some of those? Because you don't want, because we talked about it on the last podcast, right, Meko, with kind of curbing these runs that end up losing yardage, because it happens a lot. And the Vikings can certainly do that with the style of defense they play. But like you said, they also, you can, if they blitz the wrong way and you get an alley, those are those plays that Jameer can turn into a 70-yard house call.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do feel like Jameer's had pretty good games against Minnesota in his short career as well.
Yeah, can't bite them.
Definitely has made a couple guys miss in space, and things of that nature. But like, yeah, this does feel like one of those games where if you can, be patient in the run game, not try and get too fancy, and really kind of just like attack them in the middle, you do have a really good opportunity, I think, to take advantage of this Minnesota team and Brian Flores, this aggressive defense. They don't have Harrison Phillips anymore. They did replace him with Justin Hargraves, Jason Hargraves.
It is. I have it right here. Javon. Excuse me.
Javon Hargrave,
Yeah.
who again, Also tied for 2 sacks on the season with this team. So again, like they've shuffled some things in the middle, but still have found ways of being very good. We talked about again them having some really good linebackers. There was a lot of talk in the offseason about their corners, kind of being like a who's who of corners. But Isaiah Rodgers has been playing really well for them so far this year. They still have Byron Murphy out there, so he's still playing really well. But at the same time, Morgan, like I do just think that this team has enough weapons offensively where you may have to be patient. You may have to, trade some punches here and there. But I think this isn't, I think whenever going up against a Brian Flores defense, like he's going to be aggressive. I feel like you have to match his aggressiveness. Like you can't shy away from that and just, kind of turtle up, because at that point in at that time, that's when his players are just going to kind of swarm and take advantage of, any type of shortcomings that the Lions might have.
Now, I love that you said it that way too, because yeah, that's where he wants you, is on your back foot, like making bad decisions, and that's how they get some of these turnovers. I think Rodgers has like 2 or 3 defensive touchdowns on the year. But to your point, I do think they're susceptible to being like, I know they're middle of the pack in DVOA in terms of like in yards per carry, but we just saw the Lions kind of put it to a really, really stout Tampa Bay Bucks run defense. And Dan Campbell talked about Tate Ratledge and Mahogany only getting better from here. If that's the case, I think they can get downhill on the Vikings pretty quickly. And in my opinion, that's the best recipe for a blitz happy, aggressive defense. Have them on their heels, questioning, oh my God, how are we gonna stop this? They're averaging 7 yards a pop. And then, like you said, Meko, you bide your time.
Yeah.
You get that single high safety look in the matchup you want, and you get JMO or whoever on a deep shot, or even Saint on some of these deep crossers where he ends up scoring off of. So yeah, there's meat on the bone for sure, and I'm excited to see how because they've had extra time to prepare for this too. They did their little self scout, I'm sure, and then they got to game planning for Minnesota. So I'm anticipating a nice little first 15, in terms of the script.
Yeah, I expect the Lions offense, specifically that, like we talked about it last week, that's not been nearly as consistent as the defense has. I expect the offense to really come out firing in this first game since the bye. So with that said, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to look at the defensive side of the football and talk about what the Lions defense needs to do to be able to take advantage of a rookie in JJ McCarthy and try and keep Justin Jefferson and that explosive group of skill players at bay as well. So we'll talk about that and a whole lot more right after this. And welcome back to Before the Roar, your preview podcast over here at prideofdetroit.com, where we take a look at the Lions' upcoming game for this specific week, which will be against the Minnesota Vikings. Morgan, in the first segment, we talked about everything that the Lions' offense needs to do and things that they need to be aware of when it comes to the Minnesota Vikings defense. Let's do the inverse of that and look at the Lions defense that's been red hot, honestly, and been way more consistent since the start of the season, and what they need to do to kind of keep the heat on JJ McCarthy, who's returning in his first start since, I believe, week 2.
Yeah, and neither of them were especially pretty in the 2 games so he played in the loss to Atlanta and the comeback win over the Bears, which is crazy to watch in retrospect now. So in the Atlanta loss, he completed 11 passes of his 21 attempts, 2 interceptions, got sacked 6 times, fumbled the ball 3 times when he was run. Like, that's a pretty crazy game. And then he also had the turnover against the Bears. That was a pick 6, got sacked another 3 times. Just kind of a crazy turn of events. So during his 2 starts, had the high ankle sprain, and they sat him for a good long while and tried to, I guess, give him time to get it right. And poor Carson Wentz, we already know that story. So yeah, it's been tough. This is going to be his first start since, like Meko said. Right now, they're sitting 29th in overall offensive DVOA, 26th in passing, and 23rd in rushing, respectively. So, like you said, this has been their defense has actually been better than this when you look at it, because this is just kind of brutal right now, Meko, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think when you talk about, if we're going to, again, talk about this Minnesota Vikings offense, we do have to start with JJ and just like what potential threat, because like you said, it hasn't been a great showing early in the season. But even when, Dan Campbell had to talk about JJ, like his thing that he's focused on is that Bears performance, is that ability for him to not have the greatest showing, but still kind of hang in there, make some big time plays with both his arm and his legs. And I think for Dan, like the way that they are probably game planning for him is like him at his best, right? Like if he is on, this is what he's capable of doing to us. But if we're talking about, well, then what do the Lions need to do to disrupt that? I think you have to model their game plan probably after what the Atlanta Falcons did. We talked about in the first segment about how the Bears are the team that blitzes the most often in games. The Atlanta Falcons are second at 40%. So far, Detroit has been very structured and kind of like middle of the pack when it comes down to blitzing. I believe they're about like at 24%. It wouldn't surprise me in this game specifically if we see Kelvin Shepard like up that amount in a game like this where you really try to rattle the young quarterback and get him thinking, a lot quicker than he wants to, especially in his first game back. So like speed up that internal clock and allow, your Derek Barnes, your Jack Campbell's, your Aiden Hutchinson's, your Alqudi Muhammad's to get after him and really make life uncomfortable and see if he can make those quick split decisions and get it out to those skill players quickly.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. And if y'all have listened to this before, then you probably going to say we sound like broken records. But if they can make the run game non-existent again, like Tampa Bay ran the ball 11 times, that's absurd. But because they're like, yeah, this isn't going to work. We gotta stop doing this. And it's just if you can do that with the Vikings, and you get McCarthy and some third and longs, because look, I'm not being a hater. Like he's got some really nice tools. I understand why he got drafted where he did, but yeah, like the arm strength is there. However, the anticipation is not. So when you watch him play, everything, I'm not a quarterback whisperer. It's not my field of expertise when it comes to football, but in layman's terms, everything looked a beat or two slow for McCarthy. Like he saw who was open, but it was too late, like the pick six against Chicago. And you kind of see that with young quarterbacks because the game is still moving a million miles an hour for them. It hasn't really slowed down yet. So I do agree, Meko. I think Shep's going to turn it up a little bit just because if you do get him in some third and longs, I think you can get creative and send extra rushers and drop into a zone. And maybe you get a turnover or two because he's already in his limited action this year. He's shown a pretty high propensity of turning the ball over, right?
Yeah, he has. And you brought up making them one dimensional by taking away the rushing attack. That's a rushing attack that's been mostly led by Jordan Mason for the Vikings, which is kind of crazy to say considering the fact that this is a team that also has Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones has kind of been struggling with staying healthy. And so they've leaned heavily on Jordan Mason so far, 88 rushing attempts for 383 yards, averaging about 4.4 yards a carry. So like, again, good production from him. That is something that just knowing how this Lions defense kind of factors, typically plays things like, yeah, they are going to try and shut that aspect down first and then dare the young guy to kind of, beat them with his arm. It is, I feel like that's got to be like the go-to game plan just because I think if not for the fact that if it's not necessarily because you're worried about JJ McCarthy probably taking the game over, it's because Justin Jefferson can. Like it's more so that like we have to do everything possible to limit what number 18 can do out there on Sunday.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like it's not a disrespect to McCarthy or anything of that nature. It's just it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback for the Vikings because we've seen it. Like who was that cat a couple years ago going crazy against the Lions? Because
Nick Mullins?
Mullins, yep. Was it Nick
It almost
Mullins?
like didn't sound like a real name. Like as it was coming out of my mouth, I'm like, that does not sound like a real name.
I think we combined two backup quarterbacks just now, and it's probably going to come to me later. But he was throwing up some prayers, and Jefferson was coming down with them, if you remember, like repeatedly, and that was keeping them in the game. So we just know, I think him and Jamar Chase are the best receivers in football, in my opinion. 1A, 1B, however you want to sort it. So a lot of respect there. But yeah, you want to get. I think that's going to be the game plan. It always is for the Lions. If you guys are watching this, if you're not a Lions fan, they place a big emphasis on stopping the run just because it does make things easier in terms of just selling out to defend the pass when you need to. And it speaks to their personnel. It's why they have so many defensive tackles they rotate in. They keep things fresh, and that's how they're able to slow opponents' running games down. But yeah, you talked about their skill players though. I mean, you got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Hawkinson. You talked about Naylor, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, they got a lot of skill players, but I know their offensive line, if they do get the tackles back, that'll be a big boost. But they got so it goes left to right, Donovan Jackson, Blake Brandel, and then Will Freeze from left guard to right guard. And none of their play has been especially inspiring. So I think that's a matchup that they can hunt to, whether it's a Leem, roll Hutch inside, roll Al Qudin in there. You got some options, right?
Yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting matchup on both sides, right? For both teams, right? Like the Vikings interior defensive line against the Lions young interior offensive line minus Graham. Obviously, Graham has like a great amount of experience, but then like, yeah, you do have this brand new group of offensive linemen as well with one rookie over in Minnesota, like how like whose interior offensive line is going to hold up better. And I think considering like what Aleem looked like against the Bucks, like if you can get that continued level of play, plus the bodies that the Lions can kind of just like rotate in when you talk about not just having Aleem, but you have Tyleek Williams, you have DJ Reader, you have Roy Lopez, and then you brought up the fact of like, yeah, maybe you do kick Hutch inside here and there and take advantage of some of those, take advantage of a Donovan Jackson and things like that. Like I've seen other teams do that against the Lions where like they'll take their best pass rusher and they've like kicked them inside to try and get a mismatch there against one of these younger interior offensive linemen. I don't know how much we've seen, Hutch bounce over to like a 3-tech spot and kind of stand over a guard, but I think this would be a good like game to kind of experiment with it, especially now that you have a lean back and considering how well Derek Barnes has been playing on the edge. Like I would kind of like to see Shep kind of experiment a little bit more this week with that type of, matchup.
Yeah, man, especially on some third and longs, like some third and obvious, because then you can just sell out and, like you talked about, have him do some Myles Garrett stuff, standing in the A gap or the B gap and terrorizing. Just they're still good pass protectors, and then on the interior offensive line, if you're wondering why we're talking about this, they're just not used to blocking guys with like Hutchinson with the skill set that Hutchinson has.
Right.
Frame, everything. Go ahead.
No, it was like you were saying, it's frame, it's the size, it's the speed, it's
Everything.
right? Like, and more than likely, he's not going to be in a 3-point stance. So you're talking about a 2-point stance rusher coming like right at you. Like, it's a lot to deal with in that situation. One other thing that I wanted to talk about before we kind of move over to offensive and defensive X factors, which will kind of lead into that as well, though. There's another key matchup that is going to be pivotal on Sunday. And it's becoming like a very good rivalry in the NFC North. But Amik Robertson and Justin Jefferson, like it's kind of, as much as I want DJ Reed back and I want DJ Reed back as soon as possible, I'm not going to be upset that I get to see Amik Robertson and Jetta kind of run it back, considering how last year went when they kind of, matched up in that last game of the season.
Yeah, man, it's becoming like story, right? Like going back to their Louisiana high school days. It was cool to hear Amik talk about some of those stories on the St. Brown podcast. If you haven't watched his episode, definitely worth it, man. It was cool. Amik has ice water in his veins, man, and I do think Jay Jettas might get him here and there just because gets everybody, but we know Amik doesn't play with any fear, and yeah, it'll be again. Hopefully, we'll see what Kirby does, but even getting Brian Branch back and being able to roll him back there with
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Harper playing his butt off, man. When I watched him on film, I was like, oh my God. Yeah,
I was gonna
looking
say,
good.
like you end up getting Thomas Harper back there. Let's say, like, let's hope that Avante Maddox can go. You get him playing in the nickel. You
Oh
got a
man, that's
lot
good.
of really good things kind of working for you on that defensive side. So like that's another matchup to kind of keep an eye out for. So with that said, let's move over to offensive and defensive X factors. You want to kick us off with yours?
Yeah. So I'll go offense. I'm gonna go Jameer Gibbs, man. I keep going back to that because I feel like Dan Campbell is like a storyteller, but like we don't always listen to him because sometimes we think he's just talking. But like when he says things like, we've been kind of waiting for the Jameer explosion game to happen, so we weren't
Mm-hmm.
surprised. I'm paraphrasing here, and it's only up from here. I was like, oh, really now? Because, and I believe it. Like they're giving him more touches. I still want them to manage him, and I do think they do a pretty good job of that. But I think this has the potential to be another Jameer Gibbs game, just if the offensive line can start resetting the line of scrimmage and creating some like north south running lanes. Because we talked about it, like Harrison Smith, been a really good player for a long time. Josh Metellus is a good
Mm-hmm.
player, even though he's struggled a little bit lately. Those guys are going to have a tough time catching the like of Jameer and Jameson if they have an angle to the sideline. So I'm going to go Jameer offensively. Defensively, I'm going to go with none other than Brian Branch, man. I think he's going to have a big game coming back. from the suspension. I think this could be a game where he gets to blitz a couple times, so maybe he could come away with a couple sacks, maybe a pick. And yeah, it was. I thought about picking yours, but I figured I'd switch it up a little bit. So yeah, you hit me with yours though.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the other Alabama weapon on the offensive side. I'm gonna go JMO. I think JMO's been kind of quiet for a good portion of the season. He obviously had a good game against the Chiefs, but obviously with that game turning out to be a loss, like I don't think people really like put a lot of like weight into like his performance in that game. So it'd be nice to get JMO really involved in this week's game plan. Like we said, this is a defense that gives up a lot of yards per catch. And listen, I think Harrison Smith has had a fantastic career. But if there's a 35-year-old safety out there and you don't test him, what are we doing? Like that's all I'm saying is that I think you do need to put a little pressure on that secondary, and I think JMO has that opportunity to do that, whether it's on some deeper routes or even on some short crossers. Like I said earlier, send some crossers through those blitzes and see if you can find a mismatch or find an open window there and see if he can just take something to the house, which we know that he can. And then on the defensive side, yeah, I talked about it earlier. I got Amik, because I think Amik is going to be huge. He seems to rise to the challenge when the team needs him the most, and right now they are going to truly need him going up against Justin Jefferson. And I don't know if it's going to be a situation where they're going to allow Terrion to kind of match up with Jettas, or if they're just going to stick Amik on him and have him just kind of follow him all over the field. But whatever the decision there, whether it's against Jettas, whether it's against Addison, whether it's against Naylor, Adam Thielen is back in Minnesota. So like whoever it is, like I think Amik is going to be really important for this defense. And even though like again with them getting Brian Branch back, I think you're still going to need him to be able to lock down whoever the primary wide receiver is.
Yeah, I love the Amik pick. I think he's going to be pivotal, especially like we talked about going against Justin Jefferson. And I love the JMO pick, man. I want to see like that play against Seattle last year when Seattle tried to blitz, the Lions picked it up, and that was the one JMO caught on the crosser and knew he was going to score by the 30. So like it's that kind of I want some of that, like lightning in a bottle, just because that's just such a boost to the offense. And it would get Jameson going and just scare the crap out of teams, because the Lions are, I know we're such a spoiled fanboy base at this point, but like people are like, oh my God, the offense is struggling. I think they have like the third most points per game, or like it's
yeah. Third best offense
crazy
in the league right now. Like it does speak to how spoiled we are, but it also it speaks to like, I guess put it this way, I would feel spoiled if it wasn't for the fact that the offensive players are saying it too. The fact that like they themselves, like Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, that Panay, like they're holding themselves to a standard where they're just like, hey, we're not doing enough, which is crazy to say when you're that explosive and that dynamic as an offense. But yeah, like when you're being a little critical and you look at this offense, in the games that they've played outside of like the Bears game, right? Like I don't know how many performances where you're like, man, they were truly dominant. So
need them to hit their stride. So I feel you. Like hit it, start hitting that offensive stride now, man. And if you can get everything to peak here, like late December, we'll be trending the right way, right, Meko?
Yeah, and I think like your pick with Jahmyr Gibbs, like if Ja can have another solid week, like we talk about it a lot, but if Ja can get going, or Ja and Monty can get it going, it's only going to make life easier for Goff and the receivers. And so like it opens up a lot more of those big plays. So I think it's going to be important to kind of see that this upcoming week. So switching gears over to our last segment of the podcast, we have score predictions. So the Lions are currently 8.5-point favorites according to FanDuel, which is a big margin, but considering the struggles that Minnesota has had this year, it's also not all that surprising. Me, Morgan, I kind of have this as a pretty big blowout. I have Lions winning 34-16. I think what we've been seeing from them defensively, I think they're going to make life more difficult for JJ McCarthy in a lot of situations. And I think if they're able to get a couple turnovers, get a couple short fields, that's going to allow for some easy points. But then I also think this offense is going to be explosive and kind of pick up where they left off against Tampa Bay and kind of be able to easily cross that 30-point mark. What about you?
I like it, man. I hope it's a nice chill game like that. And I see why you'd pick it that way. And I kind of go in the same boat. Maybe the score ends up one of those instances where it looks a little closer on paper than it actually was, but I'm going 31-21. I do think the Lions will be able to move the ball. I'd like to see them be a little bit better on third down, like everybody's been talking about. If you clean that up, that'll go a long way to making this offense more efficient. And like we talked about, less negative plays on first and second down, whether those are running plays or screens or what have you. And I do think that the Minnesota will move the ball a little bit, so long as McCarthy's not seeing ghosts by the second or third quarter.
Yeah.
Crazier things have happened. Like he was moving it against Chicago. So I'm not going to say that he hasn't done anything, because he was obviously, something was working against the Bears in the second half. So, but I think they'll be able to move the ball just a little bit, just because they do have so many, like elite weapons, to be honest with you. So 31-21, another Lions win, and hopefully just being able to stack another W.
Yeah, getting that much closer again to keeping a top spot in the NFC, and hopefully, continuing to march closer to, once we get that rematch against the Green Bay Packers, hopefully eventually reclaiming the lead in the NFC North, which would be absolutely huge for this team. So that's pretty much going to do it for us, guys. That is your preview podcast for the week, with us taking a look at the Detroit Lions and everything that they need to do in order to get a win against the Minnesota Vikings this week. Like always, if you are looking for any more additional news or updates on this team and about this game, always head over to prideofdetroit.com. Like we said earlier, the injury report we gave you is only for Wednesday. So if you want to see where guys kind of are landing closer to game day, definitely check out the website for that information. That's where you'll be able to find out who's actually going to be playing, who's actually going to be out, and all of that great information. And if you're enjoying the podcast or enjoying watching the podcast over here on YouTube, make sure to drop us a sub, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell over here on YouTube. That helps out the channel immensely. And yeah, make sure to drop us like 5 stars over wherever you are listening to podcasts, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcast, or I don't know if there's another podcast platform, but wherever you're listening to podcasts, make sure that you let them know that you enjoy our podcast. So yeah, with all that said, I'm Meko. He's Morgan. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch and listen, and we'll see you guys in the next one.